Anger at the 10-year jail sentence for the lorry driver who killed a family while playing on his phone. A mother and 3 children died when Thomas Croker smashed into their stationary car. Footage shows he had barely looked at the road for up to 45 seconds.
10 years in prison will not ease our pain and suffering, nor do we believe it will send a strong enough message to those who lack the self-restraint to not use their mobile phones whilst driving.
Also tonight, no inquiry into the Battle of Orgreave. The government claims there was no miscarriage of justice.
It was a Conservative government that instructed the police at Orgreave to act like they acted, so I'm not surprised.
Just 8 days to go until Election Day, and the gap between Trump and Clinton keeps on narrowing. And
hi YouTube, it's Nikki from Nikki Lily, and today
The inspirational 12-year-old blogger who is the pride of Britain.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Alistair Stewart.
good evening. When Thomas Croker ploughed his lorry into a line of stationary traffic last August, he was so distracted by his mobile phone he did not even brake. A judge said he might as well have had his eyes closed. Croker's selfish actions had devastating results. He killed a mother and 3 children.
Today, after he was jailed for dangerous driving, the victim's relatives said his 10-year sentence wasn't justice and didn't send a strong enough message about the dangers of phones. From Reading Crown Court, Duncan Golestani reports.
They were a happy family, brought together by their parents' new relationship. But the only person still alive in this picture is Jake, the tallest child. He watched the deaths of not only his stepmother Tracy, but also his sister Amy and stepbrothers Ethan and Josh. Thomas Croker is about to smash into the stopped cars behind them. He only looks up at the road moments before impact.
In the moments Mr. Croker chose to look at his phone, he caused a multiple vehicle accident that endangered all surrounding road users and took the lives of Tracy, Ethan, Josh and my daughter Amy. To all intents and purposes, Mr. Croker's use of his mobile phone whilst driving turned his lorry into a lethal weapon. He was so distracted, he made no attempt to slow down.
Had Croker been watching the road that evening, it's possible he would have had up to 45 seconds to see the traffic ahead at a standstill. In this slowed down video recorded in the lorry's cab, you can see Croker scrolling through music with his left hand. The judge said he might as well have had his eyes closed. The 30-year-old ploughed into the cars behind Tracy Houghton's at more than 50 miles per hour. The force reduced her Vauxhall Corsa to a third of its size. Crushed beneath a lorry in front, Tracy and the children stood little chance of survival.
The sentence of 10 years in prison will not ease our pain and suffering, nor do we believe it will send a strong enough message to those who lack the self-restraint to not use their mobile phones whilst driving.
If it is possible one detail can add more pain, the families learned that just an hour before the crash, Thomas Croker had signed a promise to his employer to not use his mobile at the wheel. If he had kept that promise, 4 lives would have been saved. Standing here, the families of those killed described using a mobile while driving as a crime that is happening on our roads every single day. They desperately want their message to get out there, but they don't think a prison sentence of 10 years for 4 lives lost is sufficient. And today, road safety groups agreed with that, calling for more enforcement of the law and tougher prison sentences.
Duncan Golestani in Reading, thank you.
The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, was today accused of a shameful betrayal after ruling out any inquiry into the so-called Battle of Orgreave. But Ms Rudd said, as there were no deaths or wrongful convictions in the 1984 clashes between police and miners, there is no basis for action.
But the miners and their supporters have vowed to fight on against what they say is an establishment stitch-up. They also say an investigation is the only way to get to the truth over allegations of orchestrated violence and a cover-up, as our Deputy Political Editor Chris Shipp reports.
They'd expected something but came away with nothing. No public inquiry, no judge-led investigation. Orgreave campaigners claimed the Home Secretary had misled them, only to let them down with no notice this afternoon.
We're bitterly disappointed.
Right. And it was not the decision you were expecting?
No.
No, not at all.
No.
The Battle of Orgreave was a pivotal moment in the miners' strike of the mid-1980s. It happened at British Steel's coking plant near Rotherham in South Yorkshire.
The first cavalry charge came a few minutes later, and it clearly worried the pickets.
There were charges by mounted officers on the thousands of picketing miners, but there is nothing which merits an inquiry, the Home Secretary has decided, into the actions of police on that day.
I have concluded that there is no case for either a statutory inquiry or an independent review.
There were cries of disgrace and shame from the Labour benches. Many suspect the Tories were simply reluctant to reopen the miners' strike and the actions of the Thatcher government.
The establishment stitch-up that she has just announced today is nothing more than a nakedly political act.
The Orgreave families and campaigners need the same justice as Hillsborough had.
The Hillsborough situation was quite different to Orgreave. There were no miscarriages of justice. There were no deaths. There were no convictions.
In total, 95 miners were charged with rioting and unlawful assembly. At that time, it carried a maximum life sentence. But a year later, all the trials collapsed due to unreliable police evidence. No officer was ever disciplined, but compensation was paid to 39 miners. By 2012, campaigners wanted a Hillsborough-style inquiry into the Battle of Orgreave and the actions of the South Yorkshire Force, which policed both events.
What do we tell the families whose dads are dead and granddads are dead? We've got to go on with his tail between his legs, and so we failed. What do we say to him? I don't know what to say to him.
But they have pledged to return to South Yorkshire and say the fight will go on. Chris Shipp, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, today's decision isn't just a bitter blow for the miners who were involved in the clashes. Some of the police officers who were on duty are also unhappy at being denied the chance to have their say on who was behind the violence. Damon Green is live outside the former coking plant in Orgreave for us tonight. Damon.
There is a deep sense of disappointment here, not just amongst the mining communities. South Yorkshire Police, we understand, were perfectly prepared to cooperate with whatever form an inquiry might have taken. This was a decision taken in Westminster, and there is a sense here this was a decision taken in the interests of Westminster. There is disappointment here, but no surprise. For many who were at Orgreave, the black and white images of that day were a reminder of something that happened a long, long time ago. But today's decision brought all of those feelings, all of those experiences back into the present. Steve Brunt was a young man on the picket line, but news there'll be no inquiry drew his anger right to the surface 32 years later.
I am gobsmacked, to be honest, but not surprised, not with a Conservative government. Remember, it was a Conservative government in the miners' strike. It was a Conservative government that did what they did. It was a Conservative government that instructed the police at Orgreave to act like they acted, so I'm not surprised at all.
Here at Orgreave, there is no coking plant anymore. Houses cover the site. Time has altered its appearance, but not changed a sense of betrayal. However much this scene may have changed over the last 3 decades, the memories of the people who took part in that pitched battle are as clear as ever. They may have hoped those memories would form the basis of an inquiry, a review, an investigation. None of those things will now happen.
Well, I personally am absolutely devastated and dismayed. I cannot believe it. Deeply shocked, because this was not what we were expecting at all, and it's not what the people of South Yorkshire, I think, deserve. And that includes not just the mining communities, but also the police force itself.
The miners of South Yorkshire have long memories, and they won't forget what happened today, any more than they will forget what happened here 32 years ago. Damon Green, ITV News, at Orgreave.
In the past hour, the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has committed to stay in his post until after Britain completes its exit from the European Union. He is extending his term by 1 year to the end of June 2019. But the Governor is not taking up the option of a full 8 years in charge. Our political editor, Robert Peston, is in Westminster. So, Robert, how do you read this?
Well, it's plainly big news. His full term was 8 years. He'd originally signalled that he wanted to stay for just 5, but actually, a few months ago, he was sending out signals that he would indeed do the full 8 years. But he was massively disappointed by the Brexit decision. He opposed Britain's, they didn't say it publicly, but I understand he was against the UK leaving the European Union, and he feels a bit beaten up recently by senior Tory MPs who've criticised him, and even the Prime Minister in her recent Tory conference speech seemed very critical of him. So, what was the government's current position? Well, he saw Theresa May, the Prime Minister, this afternoon, and she urged him to stay because the government is desperately worried about the impact on the confidence of markets were he to go in the middle of those crucial Brexit negotiations. So, essentially, after begging and pleading by the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, he has stayed an extra year till 2019. But I have to say, broadly, it shows me quite how powerful the Bank of England, the Governor of the Bank of England is, because he has chosen when he wants to leave.
Robert Peston in Westminster, thank you.
The bitter race for the White House has entered its final full week of campaigning, with the race, according to some polls, neck and neck after revelations over Hillary Clinton's emails. Tonight, challenger Donald Trump praised the FBI for reopening the probe and said that took guts.
With just 8 days to go until the election, Mrs. Clinton is battling to keep her momentum, as our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports.
You really have called me violated federal law.
As she headed here to Ohio this morning at the start of a final brutal week of campaigning, Mrs. Clinton is besieged by questions and innuendo, levelled by her opponents, but also by the FBI. Donald Trump is exploiting this legal and political uncertainty, rallying his core supporters, also revelling in this late-breaking twist to the presidential campaign.
650,000. You know what I call that? That's the mother load. She would be under protracted criminal investigation and probably a criminal trial, I will say. So we'd have a criminal trial for a sitting president.
The encouraging news for Mrs. Clinton is that in this key battleground state, her supporters appear more defiant than despairing.
Thanks for coming out to vote.
At this polling station, Hillary's backers were holding firm.
They've been talking about the emails since the beginning of the race. The emails mean nothing to me. I don't even know that they're real.
She has been scrutinized to a level that I don't even know who else has. And at the end of that, she still stands up for this country and some ideals that I believe in, and I'm voting for my ideals.
Initially, I thought it would damage her somewhat, but since the FBI has no idea what's in the emails, they haven't even looked at them, eventually the voters will see that it should have no bearing on the election at this point.
Seeking to regain the narrative, the Clinton campaign is now launching Operation Fear.
I want to be unpredictable.
In this TV ad suggesting a President Trump might launch a nuclear war on impulse.
What safeguards are there to stop any president who may not be stable from launching a nuclear attack?
We now have one highly unpredictable week left. Two candidates both scarred and battling scandal.
We love you, Hillary!
Both sensing that this race remains in the balance. Their campaign managers fearing that one more surprise might still lie ahead. Robert Moore, ITV News in Akron, Ohio.
Our correspondent Penny Marshall is there, live in Detroit in Michigan, where Donald Trump is due to hold a rally. Penny, is there a renewed confidence in the Trump camp following the weekend's developments?
Well, certainly there's a boost amongst the true Trump believers here because they think this is going to lead to a surge. But it's not what the people in the halls like this who matter. It's not what they think that matters. It's what matters is what the people outside think, the floating voters. And the Trump campaign is hoping that this is going to change their minds. But no, of course, this can't do him any harm at all. Just a week ago, everybody was talking about Hillary's fitness to be president. Now, sorry, everybody was talking about Trump's fitness to be president. Now, all they're talking about is Hillary's. And I think it is also changing his strategy a little. Commentators are saying that perhaps he's out on the stump a little less. So with just a week to go, the mood music is changing. If you turn the volume down, perhaps too early to tell decisively whether it'll make a difference at the polls next week.
Penny, thank you.
And let's return to Robert Moore, who's with the Clinton campaign in Ohio. So, Robert, with just 8 days to go, is it really now all to play for?
You have to ask yourself, in a crisis.
Well, Mrs. Clinton right now, right behind me, is trying to show above all else political resilience and give no sense of panic whatsoever. And it's fair to say, Mary, that the kind of seasoned campaigned operatives are saying that voters have actually already factored in this email scandal. And they also believe the fundamentals of this race haven't changed, that Mrs. Clinton has the edge with the key demographics like Hispanics and African Americans, with women and young voters. I think the greater concern here is a longer term one, that if she wins, then that she could easily face a sort of crisis of governance. Her early presidency could be paralyzed by a combination of ferocious opposition from Republicans and endless FBI investigations.
Okay, Robert Moore in Ohio, thank you.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, some of the government's own MPs say claims it's injecting £10 billion into the NHS are false.
And the 12-year-old blogger picking up a Child of Courage award at the Pride of Britain. A remarkable story in the rest of the day's news after the break.
Welcome back. The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, defended his claim the government made the NHS £10 billion better off, despite claims from within his own party that it's wrong and misleading. Conservative MP and chair of the Health Services Committee, Dr Sarah Wollaston, said it suggested the NHS in England was awash with cash when it's having to cope with large gaps left by cuts to services. Our political correspondent Libby Vina reports.
Just how much extra money is the government putting into the NHS? Is it really £10 billion, as ministers claim, or have they been massaging the figures?
Dr Sarah Wollaston.
This Conservative MP, who trained as a GP, thinks so, telling the Health Secretary the real figure is less than half that.
Whilst I accept that he doesn't agree with the Health Committee's appraisal of the 10 billion figure, I'm afraid that I stick by those figures.
I don't agree with the letter she wrote today, and I'm afraid I do think her calculations are wrong. The use of the 10 billion figure was not, as she said in her letter, incorrect.
At issue is the Health Secretary's claim that there'll be £10 billion extra in funding for the NHS by 2020. The Health Select Committee says more than £3.5 billion comes from cuts to public health and medical training, and a further £1.5 billion from changing the spending review period. The real figure is just over £4.5 billion. The debate matters because many hospitals are in the red and waiting lists are rising, including here in Colchester. This hospital is in special measures, the staff struggling to raise standards. The chief executive says what the NHS as a whole needs is a major change in the way it delivers care, as well as a big injection of cash.
I remember the days when it was 2.5 year wait for a hip replacement. It wasn't that long ago, and it would be such a shame to slip back from the excellent progress the NHS has made over the past few years to get to people having their hips replaced or other surgical operations within 18 weeks. So there is a risk, unless we do the radical reform, that those standards will start to slip.
If they do, today's row over the figures may well come back to haunt ministers. Libby Vina, ITV News, Colchester.
A man has been jailed for life for the murder of a waiter, Shurjit Chukka, 18 years ago. Ronnie Coulter was originally cleared of stabbing the 32-year-old at the High Court in Glasgow in 1999. But after changes to Scotland's double jeopardy laws, he was tried a second time and found guilty of the murder.
And UKIP's Raheem Kassan has pulled out of the leadership race just 3 days after the official launch of his campaign. The former aide to Nigel Farage says the path to victory is too narrow.
And finally tonight, the inspiring 12-year-old girl who refuses to let her facial disfigurement hold her back. Nikki Christou has a rare health condition and started a YouTube channel to raise awareness of it.
Her channel also helps other people with disabilities face the world with confidence. And now Nikki's work's been seen and they've voted her a Child of Courage award in this year's Pride of Britain. Angus Walker reports.
Hi YouTube, it's Nikki from Nikki Lily, and today I am super duper excited because I have ITV here.
12-year-old Nikki Christou has a condition which causes facial disfigurement. But instead of hiding away in her bedroom, she turned it into a studio and happily chats about her condition.
I have an illness called an AVM, which stands for arteriovenous malformation, which is a rare illness.
She also gives makeup tips.
And then just dot that all over my face and just rub it in.
And baking classes.
We are going to be making coconut and white chocolate Easter cupcakes.
It's a recipe that's helping so many others to find the courage to deal with their own challenges.
I get amazing comments like, you've changed my life, you're beautiful, I was feeling really depressed and you've given me a different outlook on life.
This brave girl who's endured 30 operations has won a Child of Courage award at the annual Pride of Britain ceremony.
I don't think I'm brave, I just, in my eyes, I just do what you would do if you were put in my scenario.
She's already been praised by Prince Harry after raising £400,000 for a charity she started when she was 7.
She is an incredible girl, and she's, she through adversity really, she's got up and just said, I see every day as a second chance and I'm going to make the most of life.
So that's it for this video, everyone. Thank you.
A young girl whose cheerful confidence is giving so many the courage to face the world. Angus Walker, ITV News.
Amazing.
Pride of Britain Awards are on ITV tomorrow night at 8 p.m.
Well, from all the team here, have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.